This is the Sabbath School lesson for the first quarter, 2022.
Welcome to Lesson 5, Jesus, the Giver of Rest, ready for teaching on January 29. It's from the series In These Last Days, The Message of Hebrews, authored by Dr. Felix Cortes, Associate Professor of New Testament Literature in the Seventh-day Adventist Theological Seminary at Andrews University. And I'm your reader for today, Dr. Percy Harrold. Monday, January 24. Because of Unbelief. Read Hebrews chapter 3, verses 12 to 19. Why was Israel unable to enter into the promised rest? Hebrews 3, beginning at verse 12. Beware, brethren, lest there be in any of you an evil heart of unbelief in departing from the living God. But exhort one another daily while it is called today, lest any of you be hardened through the deceitfulness of sin. For we have become partakers of Christ if we hold the beginning of our confidence steadfast to the end. While it is said, Today, if you will hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion. For who, having heard, rebelled? Indeed, was it not all who came out of Egypt, led by Moses? Now with whom was he angry 40 years? Was it not with those who sinned, whose corpses fell in the wilderness? And to whom did he swear that they would not enter his rest, but to those who did not obey? So we see that they could not enter in because of unbelief. The sad story is that those who were delivered from Egypt were unable to enter into the rest that God had promised them. When the Israelites arrived at Kadesh Barnea, at the point of the promised land, they lacked the faith that they needed. Numbers 13 and Numbers 14 explain that the Israelite spies brought to the people of Israel a bad report of the land in Numbers 13:32. They affirmed that the land was good, but they warned that the inhabitants were strong and the cities were fortified and that they would not be able to conquer it. Joshua and Caleb agreed that the land was good and did not dispute the fact that the people there were strong and the cities were fortified. But they said that God was with them and that he would bring them into the land, in Numbers 14, verses 7 to 9. And that reads, And they spoke to all the congregation of the children of Israel, saying, The land we pass through to spy out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, then he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, nor fear for the people of the land, for they are our bread. Their protection has departed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. Yet the people who saw God destroy Egypt through plagues in Exodus chapter 7 through to chapter 12, annihilate Pharaoh's army in the Red Sea in Exodus 14, and provide bread from heaven in Exodus 16, and water from the rock in Exodus 17, as well as manifest his continuing presence and guidance through the cloud in Exodus 40, verses 36 to 38, failed to trust in him now. Exodus 40, verses 36 to 38. Whenever the cloud was taken up from above the tabernacle, the children of Israel would go onward in all their journeys. But if the cloud was not taken up, then they did not journey till the day that it was taken up. For the cloud of the Lord was above the tabernacle by day, and fire was over it by night, in the sight of all the house of Israel, throughout all their journeys. It is a tragic irony that the generation who saw such mighty displays of God's power became a symbol of faithlessness, as we read in Nehemiah chapter 9, verses 15 to 17. You gave them bread from heaven for their hunger, and brought them water out of the rock for their thirst, and told them to go in to possess the land which you had sworn to give them. But they and our fathers acted proudly, hardened their necks, and did not heed your commandments. They refused to obey, and they were not mindful of your wonders that you did among them. But they hardened their necks, and in their rebellion they appointed a leader to return to their bondage. But you are God, ready to pardon, gracious and merciful, slow to anger, abundant in kindness, and did not forsake them. And then in Psalm 106, verse 24 to 26, then they despised the pleasant land. They did not believe his word, but complained in their tents, and did not heed the voice of the Lord. Therefore he raised his hand in an oath against them to overthrow them in the wilderness. And 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 5 to 10. But with most of them God was not well pleased, for their bodies were scattered in the wilderness. Now these things became an example to the intent that we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted, and do not become idolaters as were some of them. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. Nor let us commit sexual immorality as some of them did, and in the one day 23,000 fell. Nor let us tempt Christ as some of them also tempted and were destroyed by serpents. Nor complain as some of them also complained and were destroyed by the destroyer. God promises his children gifts that are beyond human reach. That is why they are based on grace and are accessible only through faith. Hebrews 4:2 explains that the promise Israel received was of no value to them because they did not share the faith of those who obeyed. Israel travelled to the borders of the Promised Land as a people. When the people were faced with contradictory reports, they identified with those who lacked faith. Faith, or lack of it, is contagious. That is why Hebrews admonishes its readers to exhort one another in Hebrews 3:13, to stir up one another to love and good works in chapter 10, verse 24, and to see to it that no one fails to obtain the grace of God in Hebrews 12, verse 15. And so to finish today, in what ways can you help build the faith of fellow believers? How can you make sure that you never say or do anything that could weaken another's faith? This lesson was read by Dr. Percy Harrold for Christian Services for the Blind. Sponsored by the Sabbath School Department and distributed through Hope Channel Australia, this podcast is also redistributed by Hope Channel Germany, Christian Record Services for the Blind, and It Is Written. It is also available on SoundCloud and through multiple podcast distributors, including Apple iTunes. Remember, God is always faithful.